Welcome to Monday Motivations, 52 Weeks to a More Purposeful You. Corry Mendoza here, and I have a very special guest. I say that every time because everybody's very special.
True.
But yeah, so Suzy Sammons, my mother-in-law, and you are a brand expert. I'm going to read your bio in a minute, but I'm super excited to talk with you today about this week's topic is about grow. So the message is grow. I think there's lots of different ways that we have to grow up. We grow up physically, and we get that concept. You see a little baby, starting to walk, starting to talk. We have a lot of empathy and compassion for children growing up physically, but I think that there's always the aspect of us growing up emotionally, mentally, and spiritually that maybe we don't have as much compassion as we have for the physical aspect. So I'm very excited to have Suzy here. So let's see, what are the amazing things about Suzy Sammons? You are a brand strategy expert and a creative storyteller. She has led a long award-winning career with creative agencies like TBWA Chiat, Day,
Yep.
Saatchi and Saatchi.
Always funny names. Yep.
Okay. 180 LA, and you've served Fortune 500 brands across multiple categories. She has served as CEO of a nonprofit in media and entertainment, and today she oversees the client services for a growing creative agency in Nashville, Tennessee. We're excited that you guys are in Tennessee, but we do miss you. I just have to say, looking at those flights, I was like, it's a little bit more of a hop, skip, and a jump than Southern California, but we're very excited that you guys are in Tennessee. So thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be together.
Yeah. Yes. So what did you think about the topic of grow this week's topic?
I know. I love it. I used to always call myself sort of obsessed with growing and making progress, but I've also had to learn how that's over the years had to mean different things, and I loved how you talked about the idea of failures and what does it really mean to feel like you have survived or are facing a failure. And I have been through many different sort of pivots. I've called them in a book I'm writing called collisions, that they're like these collisions that happen in life. And you might look at those as failures, but it's actually, the way your life is meant to go and the way God shapes each of your kind of seasons of growth. So for me, that's just sort of been obviously personal, spiritual, professional. And for sure, when we're all on this journey, everyone's on their own journey. So whereas I have faced things that feel like failure professionally, it created open doors for me to grow spiritually and personally and relationally with my family. Or like I've had colossal failures, like failed in my first marriage. And like, that's a pretty big failure that you have to sort of face. And I will say also then that just was the same moment in my life where I went through a giant catalyst that created a new trajectory of growth. So there's always both, right? The hardest times of our life that feel like failure are the times we're growing the most.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, and I was listening to some podcast, and the speaker, I can't even tell you who it was, but they were talking about how you can't have growth during the good times. And that's a bold proclamation that I would prefer not to be true. But when this person made that statement, I felt like my rebel energy rise up in me, like, no, I'm proactive and I can grow. It doesn't have to be through the hard seasons, but it is, I do think that might be pretty truthful, that it is usually during our hardest times that we grow. What do you think about that? Do you think we can grow when we're not going through a hard time? So like, those seasons that are going great. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I have heard that also. And I think it's a really good question, because in order to grow when you're not being challenged, I think like in someone like you, where you are intentional and you're pursuing growth because
all the
that's just who you
time.
are. Yeah. You are always pursuing sort of how to be better. Like, and I'm one of those people that I can look at myself critically, not for the sake of pushing myself down, although I've had to learn that, trust me. But rather just to not make the same mistake multiple times. Like, so it's really just how you can grow during good times, or even what other people perceive as good times, but you might be struggling because it's not what you want. Like, I wanted to write this book of mine for a decade, and I would consider myself a failure and haven't gotten that done yet. But at the same time, I just have to really let the voice come forward. That's the shaping of my life. That's going to, when I do make the time to get the book written, it'll be better. Right. So it's how you look at things, no matter if you're in good times or bad times. However, during the toughest times, it can either be a season of growth or collapse. Right.
I think that's a good point. I think that's a really good point.
In either situation, positive or negative forces acting on your life, how you respond to them is how they will end up being made part of the story,
So what, on the topic of growth, what do you think, how can a person grow? Because I mean, I'm sure you can look around and people, time doesn't mean growth. Like physically, I think that's a really big point, that time when it comes to physical growth is a guarantee.
Yeah.
You're 3, you're going to have more cognitive abilities than when you're 18 months,
Right.
Like, so time when it comes to physical growth is not a guarantee, but it's like, unless there's a medical block,
right,
you're going to grow. But when we think about growing with emotional intelligence, spiritual and emotional growth, what do you think it really takes to be able to grow spiritually and emotionally past 18 to 25 years old? Because that's that physical.
Yes, it is such a good point, because you can look at somebody that's 50 years old when you're 50 years old and think that they they should have, or somehow would have the same sort of experience and perspective that you do, when that's absolutely rarely true. Everybody's on their own trajectory. So I've had to learn that I can't expect somebody else, whether it's on a spiritual journey or a professional journey, just because we're the same sort of age doesn't mean we experience the same things or even approach them the same way. But I think you do have to be intentional about it and own your life. Like, bad or good things can happen in your life, but I've noticed that people who don't own them for themselves and tend to live, if there's an external force, it's that sort of locus of control, right? Where is your locus of control? If you yourself, and for people that follow God, view God as that center of your life, then that's your perspective when you're facing any new day, good or bad. So I just do think it has to be a decision that you are owning your own story, and whether or not you have big ambitions or just goals relationally or other kinds of goals, it's you owning your path to that goal.
So what I hear you saying is that growth is a big piece of it, is owning your life. Is that what you're saying?
I think so. Owning your reaction and your what motivates you and how you respond to those motivations, right? So, someone I love very much in my life always says, oh man, I really wanted to let that person know how I felt about them and send or call or whatever, but I just never got around to it. And so that's just an example of, no one will know how you feel if you don't let them know, right? So you can just own that if that person doesn't know what you think or how you feel, it's because you're not sharing it, not
Mm.
something they're doing, you know? So that's such a very sort of simple base example of, we have to own what's going on in and around us that we're creating, right?
Mhm.
All of us create what the relationships are and the events that we can happen and make happen and not make happen from within us. So yes, we have to own it.
Can you think of a time when you shifted out of not owning your life and then all of a sudden like, oh, I need to own it, whether it's like a fitness thing, a huge thing, a little thing, but I'm trying to kind of, for those listening, because we're talking about growing, like, is there, I want to get kind of into the weeds about what does it really mean to grow and to own your life?
That is a great thought. I have so many sort of in a career context where, and I also have it in a parenting context, you know, so
One would be great to start with.
from a career standpoint, when I saw myself as having a certain position, and I was working for an agency in Chicago, and I was traveling to LA, every couple of weeks.
How old were you?
I was in my early 30s.
Okay.
Later 30s. Yeah. And so I was very much in that executive leadership kind of moment of my life and wanting to be seen that way. Right. And I was feeling frustration, which frustration is an interesting sort of symptom
of growth, I think.
Growth, yes. Or when you're not
growth.
That's right.
It's
That's
an
right.
invitation. It's an invitation, but it doesn't mean we're going to accept it as growth.
That's right. So
it could go really bad.
It could.
This is good. This is good.
That's so good. I think frustration, like you just said, that's such a good way to think about that, because if we just allow ourselves to sit in frustration, then we're letting the control come from outside. Mm-hmm. We're letting the other people and their reaction to us, or even how we're seeing, there's codependencies that are, at play here, where I'm feeling like I'm not hearing what I think I should hear so that I would recognize their respect for me, and that's causing frustration, which is this kind of ridiculous cycle in my own mind of frankly, immaturity. Mm-hmm. Instead of saying, no, you know what, I am a leader. I am being heard as a leader. I can lean in, stand up, and take that leadership position and just assume it, as opposed to trying to work and keep putting things out there with the expectation that somebody else is going to say or do or react a certain way and invite me into something that I think I should be invited to.
So I really think you're touching on something that is really great in the workplace.
Yeah.
When people go from being an individual contributor to perhaps a leadership position, yes, or mid-level management into senior leadership. So basically you're kind of describing a scenario where you are earning your worth through performance. Mm-hmm. And when you mention like the codependencies, where it's like we're at that immature state in our professionalism, we're almost like a child, like, look at me, yeah, you promote me. But what you're naming is the way that you grow out of that is you step into your power and authority and your voice.
Yes, that's exactly right. And that's the difference between somebody that is thinking like an employee versus a, leader, manager. Yep. Mm-hmm. And I think that is a shift I had to make, because then what happened was I didn't want to move to LA. I was living in Chicago. So they gave somebody else the position that I had and put me just in charge of my little Chicago region instead of I was in charge of the whole country. And I just took that as such a insult. But it was my choice not to want to move back to LA for my family. And it didn't stop me from still helping the new leader and acting in the same way I acted in the sort of thought leadership and teamwork orientation. It didn't take away anything from me because I didn't even lose a salary. They didn't cut my salary, so they were trying to honor me in these ways. But my ego was hurt, and I felt like my position had been declined when I didn't need to see it that way.
Yeah.
Right. Nothing about my authority and position needed to change, except maybe some of the traveling I had to do or some of the responsibilities that I had, but I could still help, I could still serve it as a leader. And I'm still making the same money. So it was just really entirely how I thought about it. And I saw myself in that context. I think entrepreneurs generally are better at that because they are already people that, like, you are taking charge of your own company and you've got this vision, you're going to create it and build it. Whereas employees at a large organization that has sort of hierarchy, understanding, certainly as a woman, that there's you don't have to see any obstacles. You can step in and offer your thinking and be present and lead without waiting for an invitation or feeling like you had to be given permission. Just do it.
Oh my gosh, this is such a great discussion because it's so timely. This is the kind of stuff, there's not time in organizations to process the psychological journey our employees go through, or not our employees, but people, like, we get out of college, they get a job and they workhorses, and then it's like work, earn the title leadership, and then there's the ambition to move up, but really the emotional maturity to move up. And we're not even getting into things not being fair and unjust that can happen, but I like the direction that this conversation has gone on the topic of growth, because we're bringing it into the workplace and that process that did you ever have leaders or a leader that really supported you and helped you navigate that emotional growth in business?
So much. And primarily women, I'll say, which, I sort of grew up my early career in the car business, which is very male dominated. And the women are the hard workers and behind the scenes, and the men are, the loud upfront ones. And it's very much a boys' club. And so I've been in that environment a lot in my life. And in several cases, there have been strong women that were my senior in every way at the agency, who, one of them I'll never forget, was just very direct about, we women are going to stick together. And this was in the late 80s, early 90s, which, there wasn't the sort of energy of the Me Too movement or any of that stuff that we could look at, because for me, that was very foreign thought, because at that point it was still very much like, got to make the men think of you as valuable. And there were lots of ways that women would try to do that. And here was this woman who was saying, we women are going to stick together, and you are this, she saw a couple of us young women in this big agency, and brought us in and would take us out for lunch, and we would have conversations about career paths and the opportunities within the agency. And I have made my most important work in my agency life, even now as a more senior, for the last 10, 15 years, a more senior person at the agency, have just always done that, mostly with young women, but of course, young men too, that are trying to come up into the workforce and understand how to succeed in an agency life. And it is the biggest joy that I have, is to help relieve some of that pressure and encourage those people in these ways. So yes, there have been specific people that have overtly, and just because of who they were and how they acted out their day, that help me sort of see myself in a different way.
I love that. I think about one woman who I just cherish to this day, Marilee Duffick. I mean, when I was first like in an office environment, she molded me, she took me under her wing. She was just so patient with me. She developed me, and yeah, like I don't even know where my future would have been without, somebody that cared
Yeah.
about me. And she gave me dignity. She treated me as if I was already polished, and I was like a bull in a china shop. I was like full
Mm.
of vision and passion and like fight for the people, and she's like, that's great. And let's
Uh-huh.
not send an email to the CEO that says that again. How about we run it past me? So but yeah, so this topic of growing, I mean, what advice do you think you could give yourself and give other people about growing?
Mm. Well, I'm a writer and a journaler. So for me, being able to stop and reflect about the season that you're in and pick a mentor, whether it's an overt person relationship or it's someone that you just identify as someone that you admire and want to sort of really spell out what those things are that you admire about that person.
Mm.
And so really, I would say I would sort of characterize all that as really know yourself and what you need, and then try really hard to go get it. So so often we spend so much time trying to serve and, like we already said, kind of push our way up and just keep working, whether it's head down or singly focused on our own vision. But if we miss opportunities around us or relationships with people that can help us, then we might miss something much greater than we could have imagined. So it is about relationships. So I would say just find a way to create a mentor growth situation. And again, it can be somebody that knows they're your mentor or somebody that you've just decided to follow their example or their teaching. I think, Simon Sinek is a great teacher on leadership, and I think he has a lot of great stuff that's easy to follow. So people like that you can really find. Obviously, Brené Brown is just a great person to sort of as a public figure, but in a personal level, find someone that you can talk to and ask to reflect back what they see in you. I think that's always really helpful too, that even if you just sort of do your own brand strategy, I've helped people sort of articulate what their brand is. And right now I'm helping my brother-in-law, who is a spiritual leader, pastor kind of person. And he just does, right? He just has built his whole profile and his whole persona based on who he is. And now he's experiencing a large enough following and has enough audience and role among an audience that he now needs to start thinking about what is the strategy? What is he trying to accomplish, right? What people see when they look at your profile. So I take people through this little brand strategy process for them as a person. And I would even say, do that for yourself,
Yeah.
to just sort of excavating some of your truths, and really figure out what you need and how you want to grow. That's back to that owning thing, right? Of what frustrates you, what lights you up, what really feels like this is life-giving for you. Knowing those things about yourself then helps you sort of make sure you're following what you're created to be, as opposed to maybe what others want you to be. So choose your mentor carefully and ask the right people what they think of you.
Yeah. So I think I hear your advice to yourself and others around growing is find a mentor, whether it's a public figure like a Brené Brown, a Simon Sinek, but find somebody that you can learn from, or even on a more personal level at work or in your community that you can. So how does a person know how to pick the right mentor?
It should be somebody that, if it's on that personal level, right? So sticking with the idea that you want to find someone that you can, have a phone call with or a cup of coffee with, every now and then, that knows you. And I would say it's someone that knows you, but isn't family. And
Yeah.
typically, like I have one of my best mentors is my sister. And I would consider you somebody that I would always be able to ask advice, and we're family, but our context is, special.
Yeah.
So I would say it has to be someone that you really feel can tell you the truth,
Mm-hmm.
and that you trust their view of you.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably the most important thing. And that someone that'll be present for you, and that you can also either do that back for them or do it for somebody else. Like, it's healthy to have that sort of cycle of conversations in your life going in a couple different directions.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe more than one, maybe it's not just one person, but you're just in.
Probably not.
Yeah, right.
Multitude of counsel, there is safety, right?
That's right. And that's right. And so to have that, get perspective, outside perspective from people is healthy. And you might be surprised what you hear. I know that I'm much harder on myself than many of us are harder on ourselves than we should be. So, believe people when they say positive things about you.
So I'm taking away two very important points. One is, the direction you took the question about finding a mentor. I'm like sitting back, like, I've never found a mentor. Like, I've never sought out mentorship. But the truth is, I've been on the receiving end of people who have taken an interest in me, even though I wasn't smart enough to have that plan of I'm going to pursue a mentor. That's not how I got through 43 years of life. I'm like, I'll figure it out myself. But when I reflect on what you're saying, it's the truth is there have been angels in my life, like Marilee Duffick, and just different. And I was probably the worst person to mentor since I thought I knew what I was doing. But yeah. So, the point that I'm taking away from your wisdom is, nobody grows in a vacuum. And I think that's a very timely message,
Yeah, that's
what
huge.
we've just been through as a society through the pandemic. We've all been very isolated. We live in the information age where, now Google is raising our children type, it's like, it's information's out there. And so more people are searching the internet than calling a family member for major advice, big purchases, life decisions, healthcare. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. At the same time, there's a very important place and safety to have mentors in our lives. And then the other thing was something I forgot. I don't remember.
The owning your story,
I
think
and our worth. That was the second thing. It was believe people when they give us compliments. And that was a spin for me when you shared that. Like, I'm really walking away with because I totally understand and believe in feedback from a sense of blind spots. But I'm always thinking of it as blind spots, like I'm not doing it right, do it better. But you're saying blind spots about you are doing it right, you are doing it awesome. Like, so having those relationships brings that positive and earned reinforcement.
Yeah, it's so true. And it's good to be open to constructive criticism for sure.
Yeah.
And I think you and I are alike in that, and that maybe we didn't seek out mentors, but everyone is a mentor, in many ways, and the right people, hopefully. But it's true that it is harder for some of us to allow someone to speak something positive and truly absorb it, you know,
Mm.
really let it fuel us. And so many of us didn't maybe have that as kids, just because, you know, our parents you didn't operate that way.
They were
You know?
surviving or whatever.
Yeah, that's right. And to be able to hear that and to allow yourself, even if you think something positive about yourself, like write it down. Like, you know, that whole affirmation, right? Like write
Yeah.
yourself affirmations. My kids did some of that, you know, in their church youth groups and stuff, where they would go around a circle and affirm each other. I think that's so brilliant. You know, I didn't grow up with that, but I'm so happy they did, where they can hear positive things about themselves. Then as we grow into more mature ages, we want to be hearing things that actually are deep truths about us that can steer our steps, you know, that can really inspire us.
Yeah. And polish us and sharpen us and reinforce the gifts that we're already bringing.
Yeah.
But I really want to talk just in the last point about, you know, those watching, how maybe, I don't know, do you offer your brand strategy for everyday people? Is it for companies? Because your company is Hawkeye.pro, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So Hawkeye.pro, you help people develop their personal brand. So that could, I'm guessing, could be for their career, or their, say they want to start their own business. Tell a little bit more about Hawkeye.pro.
Thank you. It has evolved a little bit to where during like 2019 and 2020, I was doing a lot of that, where people were, you know, we were hosting kind of events, and people were getting this kind of help to shape what their own story is. And they might have been speakers or influencers. Today, Hawkeye is doing that for just a few people that are already established platforms that are kind of, we're trying to help shape their stories. They go to publish something new. So we're sort of agenting those individuals. But for companies, and I've helped a lot of small companies. We also help very large companies through Confidant, which is the agency I work for also. So there's a little sort of a big and a small.
Yeah. So Confidant would be for a larger organization, like 100 employees plus, or
Yeah.
50
We
employees.
actually, well, it depends. It's really, I would say over 100 employees would
Okay.
serve that size. And then smaller, depending on what the objectives are, Hawkeye could come alongside and sort of help shape the brand story.
Mm.
And then from there, you can decide what kind of content you're making. But Confidant is also sort of significant content studio. So we make a lot of content for people's, whether it's their website or their just identity and those kinds of things. So Hawkeye does a lot of that kind of smaller context, individual brand strategy work with people. So,
well, I'm sure there will be a lot of people watching that are going to want to know more about that. So, and I'm also going to be reaching out to you for that. So everyone, thank you so much for we had Suzy on the show today, and for everybody, come back every week. Monday Motivation, 52 weeks to a more purposeful you. Our topic today was grow, and next week, let's see what we're going to discuss. Always motivating our week. So thank you.